Hello again, this is Victor James, author of the Megacosm, and I wanted to discuss Skybound's Energon universe. Not the entire universe with the G.I. Joe and everything in there, but just the Transformer line. Like I said in my Michael Bay video, I'm a big Transformer fan. G1 was my toy of choice growing up, and yes, I was one of those kids who was traumatized by Transformers the movie back in 1986. And my fandom persists to this day. I actually always thought I was the upper echelon of Transformers fan, knowing as much about the lore as I could, but I've come to realize that there are some collectors and fans out there whose passion for the franchise borderlines an obsession, and I'm here for it. Transformers deserves and has earned that rabid fan base. But I feel there's a downside with that mega fandom in that they will accept almost anything with the brand's label. What I mean is, I will go to my grave saying Michael Bay slop has done more to damage the franchise than anything or anyone has done outside of Simon Furman, and I know mentioning that name will get me blacklisted from fandom, so I'll move on. But I for one am more discerning when it comes to what I accept as Transformers. I have personally liked very few Transformer adaptations because I never felt they captured what Transformers was in regards to the G1 line. I mean, just naming random characters with familiar names doesn't make it Transformers to me. Marvel's Transformers comics were always the standard, as many characters and famous storylines were born from this classic run. But for decades, I have always held Dreamwave's version of Transformers as the pinnacle of Transformers comics, even above Marvel's run. For those of you unfamiliar, Dreamwave came out in the early 2000s with the story Prime Directive. It utilized all the G1 characters and humans who were slightly older and jaded, like Spike Witwicky, who was done with the Cybertronian War. It treated its G1 characters like the cartoon counterparts. It made the story all about the Transformers, which other publishers seemed unable or unwilling to do. It had a tight storyline with fantastic Pat Lee art, and I always held up any attempt at Transformers since then through the Dreamwave lens, and most attempts came up short. But then came Skybound, Robert Kirkman's flagship company who came along and rescued Transformers franchise from the sinking IDW ship. Everyone was excited about the creator of Invincible and The Walking Dead back in the Transformers franchise, and we have not been disappointed. In a dying American comic market, Skybound's Energon universe is held up as one of the tentpoles keeping comics alive. And Transformers fans are eating it up. You can't go to a Transformers fan site or Instagram and not see them gushing over Skybound's versions of Transformers. Many, not all, are calling it the greatest Transformers series ever made. So let's compare the two. Which is better, Dreamwave or Skybound's Transformers? With Transformers, it always begins and ends with the characters. One of the main problems comic book publishers have, besides hiring Simon Furman, is their use of the characters. As I said before, Dreamwave took care with the G1 characters, pushing them closer to their cartoon roots where the Autobots were actually heroes and the Decepticons were evil. At the time, Dreamwave chose to basically continue the G1 storyline, foregoing any lengthy introductions to humanity in each Transformer. Some of my favorite characters like Ultra Magnus, Cup, and Hot Rod were given their proper due, and Dreamwave was not afraid to use Megatron from day one. I don't know why, but comic publishers always seem to want to hold off Megatron with some grand reveal or separate comeback story, which I never understood, since we don't get that Optimus and Megatron interaction. IDW was notorious for this, except for their all-hail Megatron story, which is by far their best. But Dreamwave nailed the characters used in their series, sticking to the classic characters with new storylines that showcase the personalities we had grown to know from G1. And Skybound has done the same. Since issue 1, they have concentrated solely on the G1 characters, choosing to reboot the franchise again with the Transformers meeting the humanity for the first time. The Autobots are heroes, sacrificing their bodies to protect the frail humans who fight back against the awakened Decepticons, but are clearly outgunned by the evil Cybertronians. And the Decepticons are evil, like exceptionally evil, but we'll get to that. You see an array of the G1 characters who have grown to love, with many getting the due they have long deserved, such as Astro Train, who was introduced in the cartoons as this powerful triple changer that could rival for leadership, but before we know it, he was just regulated to just a troop transporter. Well, not in the Energon universe, and I love that. I love that Starscream immediately took command of the Decepticons in Megatron's absence, and that Soundwave challenged him just because that's what a loyal Soundwave would do. I love that we get to see Beachcomber sticking to his passive roots, staying out of the war until it came to his doorstep. These are nods to the Transformer fanbase that both Dreamwave and Skybound nailed, so let's call the use of characters a tie. Now here's where Transformers fans' fingers will start hovering over the dislike button. This is a personal peeve of mine. I loathe seeing the humanification of Transformers. And what I mean by that is Transformers who act or look more human. We'll save the act more human for a later video and concentrate on the look for now. Near the end of the Marvel Comics run, Transformers began to exhibit human traits. I'm talking eyeballs, teeth, spittle, nose. Granted, this is thankfully rare for Transformers comics and depends on the artist, and neither Dreamwave nor Skybound has gone this route, for the most part. Written and drawn by Daniel Warren Johnson for the first few issues, Skybound's Transformers has, for the most part, kept the G1 aesthetic of their Transformers. The Seekers look like F-15s, Skyfire still has that Veritech look, Soundwave still has his tapes, and Prime is Prime. I love that Daniel depicts them transforming in his art as well, which honestly other comic lines do not do as much. His art is kinetic with that over-the-top action as a driving factor in the evolving storyline. But there have been other artists, and sometimes they'll throw in human teeth, which I notice, and sometimes the Transformers can look a little bendy. And what I mean is, you see these big beings made out of Cybertronian metal being kicked or rammed into, and they bend instead of break. And personally, I feel like the art got worse with the new artist. We got more teeth, strange angles, and human-like faces. I feel like after Daniel gave up drawing the comics, the art faltered, but that is bound to happen when you have a long series run. Robert Kirkman himself has taken over the comic book series with Dan Mora as the artist from issue 25 on, so hopefully we can get back to some robotic consistency. During Prime Directive and War and Peace, Dreamwave did show some teeth, but mostly stuck to the robotic form. The Transformers felt like they had weight. They didn't have these bendy, almost organic feel to them at all, and always kept to their G1 forms, at least in the beginning. I didn't read them all because Ninoho started injecting his nonsense lore into it, but again, that's a video for another time. For now, when it comes to art, Dreamwave takes the lead, but Skybound is just beginning, so maybe they'll go away from this human-ish look and get more robotic. Okay, here's where I start to lose actual subs. So Dreamwave began with a fairly simple storyline. The Autobots had finally defeated the Decepticons and were leaving Earth until their shuttle, the Ark-II, exploded, and with all were presumed dead. However, Transformers began appearing as humans found their remains and thought they could control them as war machines. Megatron proved them wrong, of course, and then tried to turn the Earth into Cybertron by unleashing a virus. So it's basically a G1 episode. Then in War and Peace, Dreamwave ventured to Cybertron, where United Shockwave and Ultra Magnus had said the war was over, and that the Earthbound Transformers were basically like those World War II Japanese soldiers who were fighting decades after the war's end. These were great original stories, where characters were given their proper gravitas. This scene of Ultra Magnus taking on Minosaur alone will always stick in my mind. I'll probably be in my nursing home with dementia, babbling about the time I saw an American flag colored truck take out a giant robot. Like I mentioned before, Skybound chose to reboot their universe, beginning with the first introduction of Transformers to humanity. This story is more slow-rolling as it spent the majority of the first few issues seeing Optimus Prime race to revive Autobots, while Starscream consolidates his power. But once again, Megatron is hidden for a grand reveal as Starscream leads his overwhelming forces against the humans and the Autobots. Then on issue 7, they went to Cybertron, where we were introduced to the war of attrition happening there. And this is the theme of Skybound's Transformers. The story is truly about the war in all its aspects. The Decepticons are overtly evil and extremely violent, especially Starscream. There is nuance with Thundercracker and Astro Train feeling a little empathy for the humans, but for the most part, the Decepticons are evil to the extreme. And I don't mind violence. I mean, I write articles and make videos about so-called toxic masculinity, so violence comes with the territory. But as a writer, I've always remembered the words of Alan Moore, who is known for his hyper-violence in his comics. And Alan Moore said, "I don't use violence unless it's necessary for the story I'm telling. I don't use it for entertainment. I try not to include any element that is not absolutely essential to the story. If there's violence, it's because the story demands it, not because I want to titillate." And I feel personally that Skybound toes that line of titillating violence. Yeah, Transformers the movie changed how violence the franchise could be depicted, but there seems to be violence just for the sake of violence in Skybound's comics. And I say this just because of the inconsistency. We see Transformers taking extreme damage only to be healed a page later, or be fine the next panel. This is telling me that the violence is there just to titillate, and not advance the story like it's supposed to. When you saw damage taken in Dreamwave, it was long lasting. Like take for example this scene with Starscream. When Starscream finally betrays Megatron, it took until the next series before we saw Megatron again. And even then he was being rebuilt by innocent and unknowing Wreck-Gar. Now this is not me hating on Skybound Transformers. I honestly do enjoy their run, since I've been starved for a decent Transformer comic for decades now. So I'm invested in their series, and I can't wait to see where it goes. However, I do hope Kirkman's run brings more consistent storytelling, where the violence serves to propel the story forward, like he's done in the past with The Walking Dead and Invincible. When violence happened there, it was for a reason. So for now, I have to say Dreamwave was superior when it comes to storytelling, as long as you stay away from the Simon Furman books, which funny enough, the Trash Bayverse movies are loosely based on, but again, story for another time. So in conclusion, honestly you can't go wrong with either Dreamwave or Skybound's Transformers. Dreamwave is still prime on my Transformers comic book pantheon, but Skybound has revived the franchise using the G1 as aesthetic. This panel mentions Sparks and Primes, which worries me a little bit because that's that Furman inspired slop, but we'll see where the story goes from here. Dreamwave flew too close to the sun and went bankrupt before their time, so you can find their back issues fairly cheap right now, and I suggest going to read at least Prime Directive and War and Peace. So as usual, you can buy my book, Fiasco Adventures, on Amazon. I have it in paperback, it's also available in Kindle, and I also have the first chapter of Fiasco Adventures on my website, themegacosm.com, so you can read the first chapter, see if it's something that you're interested in, and think about buying. I also have a Substack where I have more chapters of my novel Fiasco Adventures, and I also have my short stories in here. So if you want to read those for free, everything on here is for free. So this is just kind of a preview to see if there's something that you want to buy. But that's all I have to say about this right now. God bless you and keep you. That's it, I'm done.